Good evening. Welcome to the Whaling Museum. My name is Jocelyn Wong, and I am the Director of Community Engagement here at the Nantucket Historical Association. I am delighted to host and introduce our speaker tonight, Stephanie Haboush Plunkett. She is the Chief Curator and Rockwell Center Director of the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. She curated many exhibitions relating to the art of illustration, including Tony Sarg Genius at Play, Enduring Ideals, Rockwell, Roosevelt, and the Four Freedoms, Inventing America, Rockwell and Warhol, and The Unknown Hopper, Edward Hopper as illustrator. She also leads the Rockwell Center for American Visual Studies, an institute devoted to the study of illustration art. As you all can imagine, it involves a plethora of resources and a concerted effort to preserve the legacy of an artist. Preserving history and telling these stories is central to the mission of a museum, including that of the Norman Rockwell or the Whaling Museum. Tonight, Stephanie will give us a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the Tony Sarg exhibition, from the carefully conserved collections to the historians and collectors who came together to bring Sarg's expansive imagination and artistic achievements to life for us. Without further ado, please welcome Stephanie Plunkett.
Thank you very much. Well, I just want to thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to have you, and I thank Jocelyn so much for inviting me to speak today. How many of you are Tony Sarg fans and have seen the exhibition? Yes. Okay. What a wonderful history. So Jessica actually mentioned the word preservation, and that's one of the things we're going to talk a little bit about today, because I think it's important to sort of acknowledge the importance that museums play in establishing, but also maintaining the reputations of important creators. And so that's one of the points that I'd like to touch upon tonight. So we will get started. What we're going to do is I'll go through a presentation, and then at the end, we're going to take questions and answers, and in a minute, I'll introduce you to my co-curator, Lenore Miller, who is here as well. So without further ado, I am thrilled to be here at the Nantucket Historical Association in conjunction with the current exhibition, Tony Sarg, Genius at Play, which has really been beautifully installed here at the Whaling Museum. And you know, when an exhibition travels, each institution really makes it their own. And that is really what has happened here. It's just a beautiful installation. Again, thank you to Director of Community Engagement, Jocelyn Wong, for inviting me to speak, and to Executive Director Miles Parker, who is here today. Niles Parker, I'm so sorry. He has been so supportive throughout this process of creating the exhibition, and from the very beginning, exhibited tremendous enthusiasm in working together, so it's been wonderful. But we also worked very closely with Chief Curator Michael Harrison, and Curator of Exhibitions, Deborah Sorensen, who I know are both traveling today. And the partnership has just been such a special experience. This lively Sarg retrospective opened at the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. Okay, sorry, there we go. There it is. In June of 2023. To appreciative audiences, and it has perfectly been adapted here, as I said. I'll just show you a couple of our gallery shots to just show you the plethora of materials that we had access to, which was wonderful. As many of you know, it takes a village and a plethora of resources to preserve and share history and the legacy of artistic production, activities that are at the heart of every museum's mission. Joining me, as I said, for the question and answer period following these comments is Lenore D. Miller, who's here in the front row. She's my exhibition co-curator and curator emerita at the George Washington University Museum in Washington, D.C. We look forward to talking to you and to taking you behind the scenes, as Jocelyn said, to explore what it has, what's been involved in putting all of this together. So just to give you a little bit of background, the Norman Rockwell Museum is located in Western Massachusetts, so all the way on the other side of the state. And we are a comprehensive resource relating to Norman Rockwell and the art of illustration, American visual culture, and the role of published imagery in society. Our 36-acre campus houses and shares the world's largest collection of original Norman Rockwell artworks, and as well as his Stockbridge studio, where he worked for 21 years, and that's actually what you're seeing here. You're seeing Norman Rockwell seated in the building that was actually moved to our property in 1986 when our trustees established a plan for building a new museum. Here's another scene of the interior of Rockwell's studio, which has been recreated to express a period in time in about 1960 when he was very active in that space. And if you look very carefully on the couch, you can see Rockwell actually napping. He tended to take power naps, and that was one of the hallmarks of the thing that kept him going all the time. So the collections actually also include a very large archive, and that includes fan mail, business correspondence, photographic references. So here you're actually seeing a Saturday Evening Post cover from the 1950s called Art Critic, featuring Rockwell's son, Jarvis, who was an art student at the time, and of course Rockwell loves the joke. He loves the commentary that those Dutch masters aren't too happy with that young man looking very closely at the portrait painting. But you'll see here that Rockwell's photographic reference includes his wife, Mary, who is posing for the portrait in the frame. And just to give you a sense, Rockwell's photographic reference was extremely extensive. We have digitized about 50,000 archival negatives and positives, and so we have a great record of his working process. The museum also holds an archive of about 25,000 works by other illustrators, both historical and contemporary, so placing Rockwell within the context of his field. Tony Sarg once said that the only excuse for working hard is liking it. The trick is to fool the world into paying you to do something that's fun. It's a good motto. Tony Sarg, Genius at Play, is the first major exhibition exploring his life and art. And of course, this extraordinary charismatic showman that he was, whose prolific career sheds light on the creative imagination and the inspiration that he provided to so many. A constant observer of human nature, Sarg was a skillful draftsman who fluidly captured the uniqueness of his subjects with seeming ease. His buoyant illustrations for posters, books, and magazines had a light, humorous touch that offered respite from life's harsher realities. This and the previous work that I showed are from Sarg's Humors of London, a series of 13 colorful poster illustrations published in 1914 for the Underground Railway Company, which operated the city's tube system. As described in a September 2nd, 1923 Time magazine article, the tube, quote, has made its poster advertising unique in the world for the high quality of its design by foremost artists. Many also experienced Tony Sarg's marionettes, the theatrical touring troupe that under his direction sparked national interest in modern puppetry during the first half of the 20th century. The originator of Macy's iconic parade balloons, which were termed upside-down marionettes by Sarg's apprentice and fellow puppeteer Bill Baird, who you actually see there, down at the bottom on the left-hand side, I believe, and Sarg is standing in front, overseeing the action. Sarg designed automated displays for the company's festive holiday windows that set the marketing standard for retail establishments throughout the world. This is just a remarkable photograph. Look at the number of people that are gathered on that sidewalk and into the street at Macy's. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that there are little insets. And those were vignettes, puppet vignettes that Sarg had created that were essentially based on fairy tales. So they were extremely popular and really set the standard for what windows were supposed to look like for the holidays, really throughout the nation. The creator of a plethora of popular consumer goods sold at Tony Sarg shops in New York City, Nantucket and Marblehead, as well as New Hope, Pennsylvania, Sarg also envisioned fanciful illustrated maps, and hosted pavilions at 2 World's Fairs. This colorful map of the fairgrounds between downtown Chicago and Lake Michigan at the Century of Progress World's Fair Exposition held in 1933 was designed by Sarg and published by the Reuben Donnelly Corporation as a collectible souvenir. With tongue-in-cheek, Sarg calls attention to, quote, exposition feet. All visitors get them. Let's see if I can show it to you. Notice there's a guy way up here in the upper left, who's rubbing his feet. He's sitting in an easy chair, if you can see that. And additionally, there's a crying boy labeled, "Loudspeakers promptly restore lost children to their family." Sarg was also commissioned to design installations for restaurants, barbershops, such as the one that you see here at J.L. Hudson in Detroit, and hotels, including the Waldorf Astoria's Oasis Cafe. At Tony Sarg's Oasis Room at the Waldorf, which is illustrated here, patrons at Cosmopolitan Cafe tables were surrounded by the artist's playful murals featuring animals of the jungle, preparing and enjoying mixed drinks. And his elephants always look a little bit tipsy if you look at them carefully. Sarg's murals were on view from 1931 through the 1960s. Drawn from public and private collections of art and material culture, this exhibition brought to light Sarg's accomplishments for new audiences, offering a window into the world of a visionary artist and influencer. A lifelong genius at play, Sarg had a resounding impact on American popular culture, and reanimating the artist's history allowed us to shine a light on the unique brand of wonder and delight that he shared through his art. So, who was Tony Sarg? This is a question that Lenore and I set out to answer, inspired by her fanciful flea market find of an illustrated linen napkin inscribed with the artist's name. So Lenore's napkin is actually the green one that made its way into our exhibition. And, we both knew vaguely of Sarg's reputation as an illustrator and, of course, as the originator of the Macy's Thanksgiving parade balloons. But we really didn't know very much about his life and career. And it was not long before we became research and traveling companions, trying to unearth as much as possible on our subject. We were grateful for the opportunity to meet and learn from the enthusiastic scholars, collectors, and institutions, one leading us to another, all caring stewards of some aspect of Sarg's legacy and art, particularly here at the Nantucket Historical Association, which just has an extraordinary collection. I'll just mention that, let me go here. Okay. Sarg painted and drew many Nantucket landmarks, including the Bonton Fish Market, which still stands today on Cambridge Street, as I understand it. From the germ of an idea, we established the objective to reintroduce the contributions of Sarg as a prolific creator whose notoriety had waned despite the cultural prominence of his work. When Sarg moved from England, I'll just mention regarding this image, what you're seeing here is Sarg in his studio. He's actually doing a commission for the Boy Scouts of America. And he was doing calendar illustrations for them, as was Norman Rockwell. So I think the interesting thing is that Sarg and Rockwell were contemporaries. And Rockwell actually worked for the Boy Scouts for more than 50 years, so they certainly had that in common. Lenore and I really tried to establish whether the two may have met. We just really couldn't find anything specific, although there was overlap in the clubs that they belonged to. So it's entirely possible that they had met each other. I'm sure that Rockwell would have been aware of him, though. When Sarg moved from England to New York in 1915, at the age of 35, he was a mature, hardworking artist with a warm personality and a keen business sense. Establishing himself in the heart of the city, he rented studio space in the famed Flatiron Building, which is what you're seeing here. The triangular 22-story structure at 175 Fifth Avenue at East 22nd Street, which I believe is currently being refurbished in New York. A curatorial challenge was to first tease out and establish a timeline for the breadth of Sarg's expansive career, and then to locate objects that faithfully represented it. So you're actually seeing here some rather remarkable early watercolors. He was quite a young man in his early 20s when he created them, maybe even a little bit younger. But the one on your left actually features a soldier who is receiving a letter, and that actually was a letter from Sarg to a friend. So he did this very creatively, and the watercolors are incredibly delicate. And here are some beautiful drawings that he would have created most likely on location when he was living in Germany as a young man. And you probably may remember the fact that he had been enlisted in the German army, but made the difficult decision against his parents' will to become an artist, to leave the army and become an artist. We were fortunate to have knowledgeable collaborators who shared information and collections and who became contributors to the exhibition catalog published by Abbeville Press. Among them was the Nantucket Historical Association's chief curator, and we were really pleased to have his very detailed account of Sarg's work, particularly relating to Nantucket, in the book. So I want to mention that one of the gems of the collection here is Tony Sarg's book for children, ages 6 to 60, and you can see some beautiful examples, pages from that book in the exhibition. The phrase from 6 to 60 is something that Sarg repeated over and over again, because he really wanted to emphasize this concept of childhood in all of us. In addition, there are some really amazing, in this collection, paintings, there are posters, there are maps, there are decorative pieces, commercial products, such as this box of stationery that was produced by the Crane Company, who makes, or who did produce paper for currency. And of course, there's a vast photographic and book archive. So literally everything you would want to learn can be learned here. Chief Curator Michael Harrison offered important counsel and access to materials, and other experts led us to aspects of Sarg's work that we weren't as aware of, particularly his life as a puppeteer, performer, and theatrical director. I believe you're seeing marionettes here from King Arthur's Court. John Bell, who is the director at the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry and a leading scholar in the field, along with his colleague Emily Wicks, who you see here, made it possible to share important marionettes by Sarg's contemporaries. So she is actually holding a marionette by Bill Baird, who actually became probably the first popular television puppeteer. And he created puppets even for Broadway. So she's holding one of those in her hands. On the right, yes, that would be on the right-hand side, or yes, on your right, there's actually a puppet by his proteges, Rufus and Margot Rose, who performed with him on occasion, as did Baird. And in that box, there's a character from Pinocchio. So there were other puppet collections that we were able to draw upon, thankfully. Dimitri Carter is actually seen here. He is the director of the Northwest Puppet Center, and he loaned and installed many examples of Sarg's marionettes, which are also on loan here, and they're quite beautiful. So he's holding a puppet from a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and behind him, almost a complete series of marionettes for Robin Hood, which was Sarg's last puppet production in 1939. Of importance was a connection made with Sarg's great-nephew, Tim Turpin, a resident of Australia who lent important family collections to the exhibition. And one of them that is on view here in this exhibition is a painting of Tony Sarg's father when he was a baby. So that's a beautiful piece, beautiful watercolor. But this work, a bucolic landscape painted in about 1900 when Sarg would have been about 20 years old and a lieutenant in the German army, was generously donated by Turpin to the Norman Rockwell Museum permanent collection. So it's really our only Sarg painting, but we're very excited to have it. The pride of present and former Nantucket residents in Sarg's accomplishments and regional connection was evident in the collections of George Korn. And some of you may have heard his talk. I believe he was here talking about his collection a little bit, which is wonderful. And Robert Fraser of the Art Association of Nantucket. And of course, this beautiful bandbox from the collection of Max and Pamela Berry, who were generous lenders as well. I'll just mention a little about the bandboxes because I know that the NHA has gorgeous examples. But Sarg's colorful bandboxes, which he sold in all his shops, originated at his wife's Nantucket store. He said Mrs. Sarg had an idea that she wanted to open up some kind of a gift shop in Nantucket. He told an interviewer in 1926. The thing was to have something unique to sell. I wondered if a selection of gift boxes wouldn't do. As a starter, we got 200 plain, well-made wooden boxes. I made label designs for the boxes and had them painted in full color. And he had a little bit of an assembly line to do this. We filled the boxes with high-class Austrian candy and determined on a scale of prices ranging from $2 to $7. They sold out their initial stock of boxes on the first day. These popular collectibles have come to be known as Tony Sarg's bandboxes. Other collectors included the Library of Congress. This is a beautiful illustration here featuring the author, the Southern author, Irvin Cobb, and the Mariana Kistler Beach Museum, who provided a series of fantastic book illustrations that are on view in the exhibition. As mentioned, the most extensive collections for the exhibition came from the NHA, which has rich holdings illuminating many aspects of Sarg's career, but how did they get here? That was something that really interested Lenore and I. The collection's origin is both interesting and deeply personal to the artist through the lineage of his daughter, Mary Sarg Murphy, a painter, illustrator, and decorative artist who has been inspired by her fun-loving father. In her youth, Mary began decorating bandboxes and furnishings for the Tony Sarg shops in Nantucket and New Hope, and later began designing fabrics, wallpapers, children's clothing, and linens. An accomplished portraitist and landscape artist, she also created illustrations for children's books and such magazines as Today, Women's Day, and Mademoiselle. And she also, well, the painting that is about to come up here is one that we were able to obtain on loan. It's actually a beautiful, just a beautiful painting of a summer home here on Nantucket. She also created cartoons for something called the Nantucket Blue Book. I don't know if anybody would remember them, but there's a small cartoon there in the center of the page, which basically says, "This book is dedicated to the preservation of the good old days." And so they remain. A nice saying. The hand-painted sign, which is on view in the exhibition upstairs, and that's what you're seeing here, hung in front of Sarg's store at 6 Bridge Street in New Hope, Pennsylvania. It is dated 1939, the year that Sarg declared bankruptcy, but he seems to have retained ownership of this eclectic shop for a period of time before it was foreclosed upon. Fondly recalled by residents, it was filled with Sarg-designed textiles, toys, bandboxes, puzzles, furnishings, and more. But it was sold by the Solebury National Bank to Mary Sarg Murphy and her husband, Everett Miller, in November of 1941, about a year before he died. Mary operated the store until it was purchased by new owners, Mary and Kenneth Leby, in August of 1964. So she operated it for quite some time independently. It's unclear when the establishment's doors were permanently closed, and even the New Hope Historical Society was not quite sure of that. Mary Sarg Murphy retired to Florida, but returned to Nantucket frequently because of her strong connection with the island. You can actually see Mary here in these beautiful unfinished pages of the Tony Sarg book for children ages 6 to 60. And she's on the right-hand side. She's kind of in a yellow sweater unpacking a trunk. But she appears on many of the pages of that book. So that's a 1924 volume. And what was clear to us in looking at it was that these delightful depictions of Mary just really indicated Sarg's just incredible devotion to his daughter. He would illustrate envelopes that had her pictures on it. She was very present in his art. The family quickly became part of the island's summer scene, and actually in 1921, they purchased an early 19th century house on North Liberty Street, and he participated avidly in the island's just emerging art colony, which coincided with the family's arrival, and the island's landmark history and folklore found their way into Sarg's art and commercial designs. In 1983, Mary made the decision to donate the majority of the Sarg art and objects in her possession in a way that would benefit Nantucket, giving a substantial collection to the Nantucket Cottage Hospital thrift shop to support their operation. Have some of you gotten some good stuff at that thrift shop? It sounds amazing, actually. In many ways, this paralleled work that her father had done throughout his time on Nantucket, as he had participated in cottage hospital fundraisers by creating illustrations of posters and programs, and by presenting marionette performances to benefit the hospital. When Nantucket resident Philip Murphy came upon this body of materials, he determined to purchase the lot for its preservation, and he and his wife donated it to the NHA, which also put out a call to other collectors who might consider adding to the Murphys' original donation. Thanks to their generosity, Sarg's art and history was preserved and could be made available to scholars. Think about what would have happened if all of that had been dispersed. It's just absolutely amazing that it was brought together and saved here. Work that has been made available made other projects possible, such as this thesis. I'm sorry, so I'm going to move ahead. Okay. Such as this thesis by the scholar Tamara Hunt, who wrote Tony Sarg, Puppeteer in America, 1915 to 42, and children's book illustrator Melissa Sweet, whose Balloons Over Broadway, the true story of the puppeteer of the Macy's Parade, was also dependent upon research. And I believe that Melissa is going to be doing a talk here next week, so that'll be a nice follow-up. It's clear that all of these threads led to an ability to create an exhibition focused on Sarg's legacy. The cataloging and photography of these materials here at the NHA was an extensive process requiring many staff hours, as you may imagine. This vast collection is now accessible online, and without this commitment to preservation, Sarg's legacy would be virtually lost to time. But that would be true of almost any artist. I would say it about Rockwell as well. This is such a wonderful photograph from the NHA collection. It's actually the first, basically it's the first Sarg balloon. It's Felix the cat. Everybody remember Felix? Or some of you may remember Felix. But you may know that the first balloon did not actually have helium in it. It was essentially carried. You can see the clowns there carrying the balloon, and it was not until 1928, the following year, that helium was used to get those balloons basically farther up off the ground so people could really see them, the crowds. In addition to all of this, we were fortunate to locate collectors with a passion for Sarg's puppetry. So nearly 3 centuries before Sarg's 1915 arrival in New York, puppetry in the United States was solidly grounded in European tradition. Immigrant puppeteers could be seen performing on street corners and in colonial taverns, while more established companies toured cities and the countryside with vaudeville-style productions. Here is an NHA collection object that Sarg actually owned. So the collection here is not as focused on puppetry, though there were a couple of examples, but this was one that he actually owned. So here you see it being unpacked for display. And it is actually the female heroine and warrior Bradamante, who is associated with a puppet play based on Orlando Furioso, a poem about chivalry, love, and war, by Lodovico Ariosto, published in 1532. Sarg appears to have purchased this marionette for his own collection in the early 1930s. He encouraged students at his summer workshops taught at the East 9th Street studio to study historic puppetry by viewing collections at Columbia University, and he took them to famous Sicilian marionette theater of the Manteo family on Mulberry Street. His intensive 100-hour courses attracted many talented practitioners, including African-American educator and artist Alma Thomas, who incorporated puppetry into her teaching of the dramatic arts. So you can see how one object sort of brings curators down these rabbit holes of research, but this was just a particularly interesting object. It would be Thomas Holden who ignited Sarg's lifelong passion for the art form. By either destiny or coincidence, Sarg was sent on an assignment by the Sketch, the London Sketch, which was a newspaper, that took him to a performance of Holden's renowned imperial marionettes. Fascinated by the mechanics and manipulations of Holden's string puppets, and you can see how realistic these are. They're really so detailed and beautiful. Sarg told of attending more than 50 performances by Holden just to try to understand how these performances were staged. And at that time, puppeteers were extremely cautious about letting those secrets out. Inspired, Sarg returned to his space on the second floor of the old curiosity shop in London, which was his studio, and he began designing marionettes. While experimenting and building, he invented the controller, which you can see drawn in very simple terms here from the Tony Sarg marionette book, which essentially was an instructional book that he created in 1921. So this is a wooden airplane-shaped apparatus that enabled puppeteers to move as many as 24 strings on a single marionette, a device that is still utilized and adapted today. Recognizing the success of his London salons and marionette performances, Sarg introduced both in New York with the assistance of skilled artists and craftspeople like Charles Searle, who you see sort of right in the middle there, who oversaw operations for Tony Sarg's marionettes, his national traveling troupe. Sarg continued to refine the construction and realism of his stringed actors through the years, inspiring renewed interest in the puppetry arts and achieving recognition as the father of modern American puppetry. We were able to illuminate this aspect of Sarg's career with rarely seen collections from across the nation. As I mentioned, from the Northwest Puppetry Center in Seattle, the puppets of Philip Huber in Tennessee, who runs his own company but also acts as a conservator of marionettes, and from the Ballard Institute. This is the series of puppets that were created by Rufus and Margot Rose, Sarg's proteges, and these are all for the show Pinocchio. These marionettes were working objects with distinct personalities and production roles. Utilized over and over again, they were subject to wear and tear and later dispersed as payments for Sarg's debts, making their survival all the more remarkable. Marionette tableaus were complemented by unique decorative case frames created by Carl Sprague. And interestingly, Carl is a neighbor of ours in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, but he's also a designer for all of the Wes Anderson movies. So, the Grand Budapest Hotel and, many others. So he was really wonderful in making these fanciful frames which set our marionettes apart so much. And he himself is a puppeteer, so I think he had a great affinity for this. I must say that the Norman Rockwell Museum staff was stretched. Their already impressive abilities were stretched as art handlers and installers because we have never installed puppets before. So we had a lot of great coaching from our lenders. And Sarg's own shadow puppet stage became the inspiration for an interactive that invited visitors to create their own shadow puppet stories. Sarg's inventiveness and inner child could be experienced by visitors to the exhibition firsthand, with thanks to those who have stewarded his work over time. In addition to the exhibition catalog and a video production highlighting the many facets of Sarg's creative output, the Norman Rockwell Museum and the American Theater for Puppetry Arts worked together to organize an interdisciplinary online symposium bringing together artists, puppeteers, and scholars to discuss Sarg's life, art, and impact. These sessions are now available for viewing online and feature a virtual exhibition tour as well. We hope that this documentation and the programmatic experiences creating here at the NHA what wonderful programs have been going on throughout the exhibition will make the ongoing study and enjoyment of Sarg's work possible. A prankster at heart, as you now know, Sarg was known for his showmanship and sense of humor. And in 1937, he staged his ultimate hoax when his towering 100-foot-long Nantucket sea monster made its way to South Beach. Installed on the sand to the amazement of all, this photo of Sarg and his sea monster on the morning of August 19, 1937, captures the wonder of that moment in time, preserved, thankfully, here at the Nantucket Historical Association, both in the archives and through the amazing extravaganza that was staged on Children's Beach not too long ago. Island promoters who worked with Sarg to stage the event reportedly felt that the stunt was a resounding success and congratulated each other for, quote, the cash value of the space obtained in the press for Nantucket. As an homage to the artist, the Norman Rockwell Museum commissioned its own sea monster, but this one is pink. And I think Jocelyn has a great name for it. Maybe she'll tell us what that is later. I think she'll tell us. So this was a whimsical inflatable at about 1/3 the scale of Sarg's original balloon, which captured his spirit and inspired smiles from visitors of all ages. And you can see, this was actually one of our visitors who got dressed up just to pose with Morton. Nothing could compare, however, to its recreation here at the NHA. As I mentioned, I think the balloon that was brought here in August was actually about 70 feet long, so it must have been quite amazing. I hope some of you saw it. As we've seen, in addition to his groundbreaking work as the originator of Macy's parade balloons, which brought him national celebrity, Sarg worked in virtually every aspect and every corner of the field of illustration. He also created, those are beautiful, aren't they? Created widely circulated Madame Alexander toy puppets, so bringing puppetry into people's homes. And he inspired new generations of performers and artists in doing so. His unselfish desire to motivate, educate, and mentor others had great impact. In 1936, Sarg accepted the honor of speaking at the first American Puppet Festival, held in Detroit. And in 1940, on the occasion of his 60th birthday, he was presented with a folio of heartfelt tributes from his fellow puppeteers. Throughout his career, Sarg took financial risks in pursuit of creative challenges. At the age of 61, on February 17, 1942, he died due to complications following surgery from a ruptured appendix. But his influence continues to be felt. Today we owe much to his innovations, which Sarg set out a century ago, and it has been an honor to curate an exhibition celebrating his work, with thanks to the scholarship and preservation efforts of the NHA and the many collectors who are inspired by his vision. It truly takes many believers to keep even the most gifted artist's legacy alive. I'll just end with a fun fact. If you get to New York, you can have a great interaction with an original Tony Sarg mural. So this was a kind of a cosmic scene that he created in Grand Central Station, which can now be found in a liquor store called Central Cellars Wine and Spirits across from Track 17. But it was originally part of the Grand Central Theater, built in 1937. So Grand Central Theater was actually there at Grand Central Station for about 3 decades, and it was a place where travelers commuters could come if they had a break, and they could see films, and they could see newsreels and cartoons and documentaries, and where they could just relax and be entertained for a little while. So it's nice to know that we still have a little bit of Tony Sarg left in New York City aside from the parade. Thank you all so much. We are so pleased to take any questions or comments. And with that, I'll invite my colleague Lenore to come on up to the podium. We have a microphone, so if you do have questions or comments, I think that we will love to have you hold the microphone so we can record your comments. Okay? Anybody have comments or questions? Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Want to bring that over? Oh, Jocelyn has it. Thank you. Jocelyn has a microphone for you.
Hi, what will happen to this exhibit? Is this all belonging to the Nantucket Historical Association, or does it go back to the Norman Rockwell Museum or various places?
Well, thank you for that question. We would love to see it have another life somewhere, but at the moment, you know, people who lend things to institutions such as this, since there are many lenders involved, they often need to have their work back for reasons of conservation, too much exposure to the light, or handling. So they may not wish to continue, but the objects in the Nantucket Historical Association will remain archived within their collection, and some of the objects are now part of the Norman Rockwell Museum through donations, as Stephanie mentioned. So they will be dispersed, unfortunately. We love to show the way it is, and I think that this museum did a very inventive and fun installation, which of course was slightly different than, but it communicated with a number of edifices in Nantucket, not just one building. They involved 3 different spaces, and therefore could expand upon the concept of what he was doing. Like there's concentration on maps in the library area, and then there's another exhibition that's located in the Hatton House.
Yeah.
So because of that, I think that every, as Stephanie mentioned, every venue of an exhibition is imagined by a different staff and designers and graphics people, and it makes it more special to the personality of the place where it's being shown.
Thank you, Lenora. And actually, in terms of your question about process, yes, at the end of the exhibition, our staff will come here to work with the NHA staff, and so the objects that have to be dispersed to other collections will be packed and shipped from here, and of course, the NHA's materials will remain here, so they don't have to go anywhere. Thank you. Good question. Any other thoughts?
Yes, go ahead.
We're going to give you the...
How were the marionette shows actually put on? What size audience, or what kind of space? It doesn't seem like you could really have a lot of people.
Well,
Do you have any sense? I mean,
yes.
I have no idea.
As a matter of fact, as I got deeper into this, the study of Tony Sarg as a puppeteer, it was out of my original understanding. I mean, as an art historian, puppetry is not necessarily high on the topic of one would discover. So you have theater history involved and animation involved. There's a lot of different disciplines that feed into an understanding. The New York Times, for example, has an archive, which anybody can access if you're, get New York Times. And I've spent a lot of time looking back over like reviews that Tony Sarg's productions would have gotten in New York and elsewhere. So he presented these puppet shows in large theaters. So it was an enormous, there were children, adults. It wasn't just for children. But his concept also was to allow children to produce their own puppet shows at home by buying these toys from Madame Alexander. So it then becomes a family occupation and entertainment before the advance of television. And they had radio, but that's something else. So yes, they were large. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. One of his earliest shows, The Rose and the Ring, in 1917, was presented on Broadway, so that was Broadway theater size. And the most extraordinary series of performances that we learned about was when he was performing at the World's Fair, the 1933 Century of Progress World Fair in Chicago, because he had a troupe that literally performed, I think, 6 performances each day in a theater of hundreds of people each time. And that went on literally for months and months and months. So sometimes he would have a couple of his troops going to different locations, and so he might have maybe 2 or 3 examples of each of his groups of puppets that could go to different places. But thank you, that's a good question. Anything else?
Anybody else have a question they would like to? I think it shows how thorough your presentation was, Stephanie. So
Yes, for an artist who was so prolific, how did he become bankrupt?
Yeah. My understanding, and you may add to this, Lenore, is that he essentially was overextended. There were a couple of things happening in the late 1930s. Through the 20s, his theater productions were extremely popular. But as entertainment began to change in the 30s, that aspect of his career almost began to wind down. But when you think about all the things that he was doing simultaneously, he was making products for the World's Fair, and actually in
1939's World's Fair, I
Yes.
think, is what maybe put him over the financial edge, because he had to produce the things that he was making for the fair by himself. He had to pay for all of that. So if it wasn't massively purchased or whatever, the inventory, that could have been a problem. Also, you have to think about the time. It was Disney was in ascendancy at that point, and when you think about it, even though I really think there was some correspondence, certainly with the production of Madame Alexander, toys, etc., both Disney and Tony Sarg had characters that were on display and could be purchased. But you have animation becoming more popular in theaters.
moving image,
and
yeah.
the moving image, and that, I think, just changed. I think the tide changed from live puppetry shows to the theater performances of animation. Think about, like, Pinocchio, for example. We do have a copy of the book that Tony Sarg
1940.
illustrated, and it was pretty much close to the time that the movie came out, the Pinocchio, Disney's Pinocchio movie.
And just culturally, America was in a Great Depression during the 1930s, and so that, I think, challenged families' abilities to participate in certain kinds of experiences as well. And so I think all of that coming together made it difficult to Sarg to continue his businesses. Good question.
Anybody else have thoughts on it?
Hi, thanks. Thanks very much. This is a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
given the fact that he, his life went from Germany to England to the United States, from your research, and because he was so prolific, did you find that there's a lot of discovery of things out there that people didn't know about, that things keep turning up that you were surprised about or weren't expecting
Well,
to see?
That's a very good question, and it adds to the opportunity. I call it the deep dive into a subject. I kept going off into tangents, I'm afraid. After, one collector showed a piece or would send an image, and they'd say, well, what was that about? And then the books and illustrated books became, there's a great number of books that he illustrated, and no one had compiled all of the books that he illustrated or all of the things that he was, the printed material is still a wide open subject. I mean, we did our best to document many of the publications, but, and some of them were pretty unusual, but he did a lot of illustration with other authors. And a few things he illustrated himself, plus all the periodical illustration that he did for magazines
Yes.
and the New York Times, etc. You see, so it's a wide open topic, I think, for more discovery, and we certainly hope other scholars will now become as interested as we became in his history and story. By the way, the book by Tamara Hunt was, seminal material, but even in that book, there were things that were not documented, left out. But she had a very good analysis of the different puppet shows and the characters and even some of the dialogue. But that was her master's, doctoral thesis, I think, early on. So that was like a jumping off point, but then a lot more we were able to put together.
And I'll just comment that illustration is often hidden in plain sight. People who do commercial work, maybe you may know their work visibly, but you don't know their names. We really don't. I mean, Rockwell was kind of an anomaly. But we see visual images all around us. Think about going to the supermarket. You see visual images on food products and in magazines and maybe in a newspaper. You see them on the web. And yet we don't necessarily think about who's behind those images, what they mean, what they're trying to tell us. And I think that's one of the lessons in really examining somebody like Sarg, because he was so present, and yet, in certain ways he was unknown, as famous as we think he was. So I always just maybe invite people to think about all of the images you see on a daily basis and what they are telling you, and maybe who's behind them.
You never know what you're going to find at the flea market. That's
another good lesson.
Another good one. I mean, and I'm sure that there are opportunities in this area to find all kinds of discoveries and artists and lenders. And I would mention that the store that during the time of the opening the Pinwheel shop, is that the name of it? Had a display of textiles from a collector by Tony Sarg, and it was on display in her window in concurrent with the activities in the museum. And I just happened upon it walking down the street, and I said, this is terrific. Where did you get these? And so she was willing to sell a lot of the small textiles, the kind of thing that people might collect or even use, and they were usable. These are products that were in everyday use, for sure. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lenore and Stephanie, for the Q&A, and thank you, Stephanie, for preparing that really thoughtful presentation. As Stephanie mentioned already, our next lecturer is Melissa Sweet, the children's author who wrote Balloons Over Broadway that was featured in Stephanie's presentation. That will be on Zoom. It's a virtual webinar, so you can register through the NHA website just like you registered for this lecture, and that's on November 6th. So in 2 weeks at 5 o'clock. And even if you are not on island that day, you can tune in via Zoom. And I do want to put in a plug. If you have not been to the Norman Rockwell Museum, you ought to make a visit, because it is a phenomenal institution, one of my favorite museums. Before we even did this NHA Norman Rockwell Museum, I would have ranked it up in my top 10 museums. So
Yes.
Yep, make your way out there.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And one more
Oh.
round of applause for
Aw,
making the
thank
trip
you.
out here.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. It was so wonderful to see you. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Jocelyn.